I love the sort of the insularity of Mr. Bean, this sort of self-centeredness which reflects in the fact that, you know, if I have to get myself into the part, I don't need another person or a situation or a prop in order to create him. You just have to, it's always about him, yes, and where he sits in the world. He's quite he's got a sort of an invisible shell around him.
Yeah. He's hugely popular internationally, isn't he?
Yes, it is bizarre actually. It's something that I try not to think about very much, because actually if I ever do, stop and dwell on how well known my face is in so many obscure, yes, corners of the world, that I think I would find it rather disturbing.
Are you made aware of it when you go abroad?
I'm being slightly disturbed about it, even talking about it. Yes, I'm aware. No, you hear extraordinary things about, like a friend of mine making a documentary for Comic Relief and going into Africa, into some of the most deprived areas of Africa, and going to this, little African village where there's no water, no electricity, no services, and nothing, no food, in all likelihood, and just a few huts, and in the largest hut, the entire village was gathered, and there was a grainy, tiny black and white screen showing a Mr. Bean video.
What about, let's talk about the other great comic creation that you made, and that was Edmund Blackadder.
Uh-huh.
What was the reason of setting it, first of all, in 500 years ago? I mean, what was the inspiration for that?
Yeah, it was after a sketch show that I did called Not the 9 O'Clock News, and myself and Richard Curtis wanted to do a sitcom of some kind. And we were sitting around trying to think of ideas, and then, of course, the dominant sitcom of the time was Fawlty Towers. There still is a very dominant sitcom, and a definitive piece of work. And I think we were fairly convinced that whatever we did, no matter how hysterically funny it was, would be unfavourably compared, we thought, to Fawlty Towers. And so we were desperate. And so I think some of the reason why we ended up, 500 years ago, was because we're thinking, well, surely if we set it in medieval times, no one's going to say it's a pale imitation of Fawlty Towers. At least that was the hope. I'm sure somebody still did say it. So that's why the first series ended up at that time.
And of course, one always remembers, of course, that classic last episode too, which seemed to define for me that narrow gap there is between tragedy and comedy.
Yeah.
It was a very bold thing and very moving, and at the same time, it did have a sort of comedic side to it.
Well, I mean, there is, it's like the current, situation with war elsewhere. There's no doubt sometimes that the darker, the more serious the backdrop into which you set your comedy, sometimes the brighter your little sparks of comedy are set out, yes, in sharp relief against it.
Yes.
And that series was full of that sort of stuff.
Yes, it was, indeed.
I mean, Richard and Ben's work was fantastic. And that last episode, which really did get quite sad towards the end, was, I think, almost deliberately conceived to defend the series against criticism that we were making light of a very tragic situation, which was the situation in the trenches in northern France in the First World War. In fact, it turns out that criticism never materialized, that people just accepted it for what it was, yes, and enjoyed it for what it was.
It's a classic nowadays.
But it was, but I remember filming when we, the weeks a rehearsal leading up to the one-day recording of that last episode, when we went over the top at the end. And for the first time, and probably last time actually in my acting career, that because throughout rehearsal, as an actor playing the part of the Blackadder, and knowing that even though the rest of the episode, of course, was its standard sort of funny sitcom self, there was this deep sort of twist in the, in my stomach throughout that week of sort of thinking along with your character that you were doomed, that you were going to die at the end of the week. It was a most peculiar, I'm sure, serious actors playing serious characters in difficult situations feel this all the time, that there's a psychological effect. And obviously if you're trying to feel the character and feel his dilemma, then you're going to feel some of the fictional feelings for real. And I was amazed, throughout, there's an awful knot in my stomach.
Was it difficult to do itself, the actual moment of doing it? Was it difficult?
No, you felt swept along by it. Yet again, I think because it was so well written, and that weird, transition when you go forward and I blow the whistle that we go over the top, and there's some wonderful lines about, because I'd been trying to pretend that I'd gone mad in order to get sent back from the front, and it conspicuously failed, and the Blackadder says some, I can't remember it very well, but says some line about, who would notice another madman around here, and a line like that, it just, grasps the moment. And it's so fantastic to be part of. But by God, I felt it. Yeah, I really did feel it.